Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 2 of The Umbrella Academy. I'm going to let you know right off the bat, I am going to be jumping straight into spoilers. I am going to be covering the entire season, so if you have not seen the entire Season 2 of The Umbrella Academy, do not listen to this because there'll be heavy spoilers. You have been warned. So now jumping straight into, in general, how did I feel about the season? I thought the season was great. It had a lot of obviously a lot of remedy. It's not like they solved all their issues last season. It's a lot of repairing a lot of those issues as well as some new issues that came up. I like how the plot device, because I think the trailer did a good job of not showing you, the fact of the matter is that it hints to it when you look at it within the context of the season of they ended up there literally in the same spot over the course of 3 different years. It's I thought that was so interesting how that was handled. I even thought it was interesting because Vanya and Diego got there the same year. Was it 63? But they got there like a little over a month apart from each other. But I thought that was so interesting how that was done, kind of dividing them up like that. I also was surprised by how little Hazel was in it. Him only being in that beginning scene, I thought was kind of interesting. I'm like, oh, wow. I mean, that's so interesting too because we never come full circle to that. I mean, we find out obviously him and Agnes, they spent time together. He's we had 20 years, but we never actually got to find out how Hazel got to where he is. I'm assuming it's kind of a whole chicken and an egg situation, where it's which one came first, where it's the chicken had to have laid the egg, but the chicken had to come from an egg first. Where I think it's that typical time travel thing where it's something has to happen, it's all a circle of it has to feed into itself. I think this season kind of hints to not only Hazel, but even why Reginald knows about the apocalypse, because that was an unanswered question. They never were able to find out how the hell did Dad know about the apocalypse when he never could time travel. How the hell is that? Now it kind of makes sense because I'm going to be jumping around, so I do apologize, but it makes sense now because it didn't even cross my mind because I forgot about that being an angle, but it's they meet their dad, they tell him about the apocalypse. I don't know if they don't 100% go into details because they're more so talking about what's happening in the 60s, not necessarily the 2019 apocalypse. So but that's what I was thinking, not less that original timeline was that the fact of the matter is at some point when the apocalypse happened, they do go back but then again, it's no, because if that was the case, they still died in the apocalypse, so it kind of blows up my theory that I'm just I don't know, it has to be connected in that. I mean, to be fair, we kind of get a little hint at Reginald's whole situation, but we'll get to that soon enough. So nevertheless, I did kind of breaking it down, everyone's kind of particular situations, Allison with Ray. I thought that was interesting because also I'm hey, it's the actor who plays Vincent it played Vincent in the originals. I feel there's something I've seen him in more recently beside the originals. I feel there was something in between the originals ending and this that I've seen him in, and I just can't remember what it was. I feel it was something fairly recent, but regardless, I thought that was such an interesting element for her story, especially what it meant for her, because obviously she did recover, and the fact of the matter is it's she basically went a year not being able to use it, not even being able to talk or whatever, but obviously she eventually gained her ability back, but she didn't use it because she knows how seductive her ability is, because even at one point later on, when Ray's kind of out, when it's all out there in the know, because Ray's why haven't you been using this? Because for her, she doesn't want to use it because for one, it's so seductive using it, because once you start using it, you just want to use it over and over again, and obviously that caused problems in her original life in the first place. Obviously that had got Claire taken from her and everything. Plus, she talked about it, I think, with Klaus, where it's I finally feel I finally did everything on my own, because she feels probably everything, it's how much of what I've achieved is me. How much of it's just my ability, me getting whatever I want, kind of just abusing my power. But it's this is something I haven't used my power in a year, and I was able to do so much. I was able to build this life for myself. I'm with somebody. I'm able to accomplish so much, especially because she's trying to do the right thing, because she's trying to help the movement for Black people in that time period, and I thought that was such an interesting element to it. And it's almost interesting too because I think in their own right, everyone kind of tried to find that hero in them to a certain extent. Not yes and no, because I mean it still kind of comes down to that thing of you're doing at least in Allison's case, she's doing kind of a heroic thing, but at the same time you can make the argument it's well, it could technically be seen as selfish because it's you're trying to fix something in yourself about it. I mean that's not just something allocated to her. That's something that resonates with her entire family. considering everything they went through, like Diego trying to be a hero and everything, he gets locked up in a facility because he keeps bringing up JFK's assassination. Everyone thinks he's crazy for it. So there's that. I thought was kind of interesting. Luther kind of fell apart. So at first it seems like, it just seemed like because he was lost, the reason why that happened. But I think it's also because it's because we end up finding out later on he actually showed up to his dad's address, but his dad was basically like, you could never be my son because I, for one, would never want children. I don't like children. I would never have children. And even if I did, they wouldn't basically look like a disappointment. Like you were like, wow. Reginald, I mean, was it that much of a surprise to learn that Reginald was an asshole even in his younger days, So but I think that's what broke Luther to the point he, turned to what he did. He started working for that dude. Was it Jack Ruby, who's a mafia dude, more specifically, and Luther would kind of fights for him and stuff like that. Klaus did the whole cult leader thing, which I thought was kind of interesting. But I think it's also for him is because I think, and even Ben kind of calls him out for it because it's like you're selfish, you're narcissistic, you want to be the center of attention. And eventually it got to the point that he no longer wanted to be because they became a little too clingy. So him and Ben end up bailing. More so it was Klaus's decision, and Ben kind of reluctantly has to go along. But I thought it was so fascinating because I guess because I think for him, Klaus has got a lot, he's got to fill up in himself because just like the fact of the matter is I'm literally stuck seeing ghosts and the dead, and the fact of the matter is his life is kind of a mess because also this is on the cusp of him losing Dave, so that's still all relatively fresh to him because let's not forget, at least when he first showed up in 60, because out of anybody, he was there the longest because he was there 3 years. Everyone else was there between 1 to 2 years. But nevertheless, I think it's because that's still a fresh enough wound because everything that went down in season 1 was literally only a couple days ago for them when they dropped down in Dallas in 60. So it probably felt good at first, especially being kind of lost and not having anyone, And it just kind of built from there over the course, having so many people surrounding you so you don't have to feel alone anymore, I think. Because prior to that, the only people he really had, he didn't have his family. All he had was the dad. I mean, he still had family and the dad because he had Ben, But he kind of abandoned all that. And it's interesting because Ben only wanted to stay around because he wanted to stay with Jill. Which I even love. I'm jumping around, but I love that moment later on when he finds out that, Jill had a threesome with Klaus and Kichi. And I love that whole thing. He's like, oh, you dirty bastard. He was calling Klaus a dirty bastard or something. She's like, oh yeah, you dirty boy or something like that. Because it's like, oh, this is the girl I like and you already banged her. Not only had sex with her, you had a threesome with her. Oh, come on, dude, you suck. I'm skipping over the beginning part too, but I'll circle back to that, soon enough. Along with all that is the whole situation with Vanya. We'll go with Vanya's situation. And that was interesting because I warned it in the trailer because I didn't really see it too much. But like I said, if I go back and look at the context of everything, I'd probably see moments of her using her powers. But I was like, what her situation was like. And it turns out, she has amnesia. I was like, that's interesting. It's like, wow, you don't remember anything about what you caused, which I think that's kind of... And I like that they play with that in the season 2 of later on when her dad's like, oh no, you're faking it. Not necessarily she was faking, but it's you get to have the benefit of being able to be someone else. You don't have to be yourself. You get to basically escape the responsibility of everything you are and who you are, the powers you have. You get to just kind of get to be someone else's fake version of yourself. You get to dive into that and be that person and not kind of take responsibility for who and what you're capable of. And I thought that was such an interesting angle to it. Especially when you look at the pairing with her and Sissy, the moment Sissy was talking about the fact is that she's being in a marriage, she's like, yeah, Carl's good, he's fine and everything, but it's you start to feel small. The moment she used those words, I was like, Vanya, even though she can't remember, found a kindred spirit because that was Vanya's whole thing. She always her family kind of made her feel small, and she found someone else who was kind of living their life, kind of feeling small in their own life too, And both of them kind of ended up finding their freedom with each other to a certain extent. Well, Vanya had already found hers a little bit, the whole heroin situation, but that obviously ended up being the travesty that it ended up being. But obviously it's I just thought that was kind of an interesting angle that was, with that whole situation. Obviously, you have, you know, 5 trying, like, you know, he got everything from Hazel about like, oh yeah, the world's going to end, and then we see like the Swedes, which the lead dude that's one of the Swedes is God, I forgot. I'm blanking on the actor's name. But he played. I might be blanking on his character's name. I think it's Delson from Lost Girl. I was like, isn't that dude? Hell yeah! I've seen him in other things, but that's the thing I think I kind of best know him from. Like his name is like Chris something, and I'm blanking on it. But regardless, the Swedes end up killing Hazel, and that's what took me by surprise. I was like, oh, we're gonna meet like a younger Hazel or something like that. It's like, nope. That's literally the only time Hazel's in the season. Like I said, that's why I thought things might kind of come full circle in that regard. I mean, because of the way time is and everything, technically there's some version of Hazel out there living with Agnes at some point in time that most likely, you know, with the way things kind of play out over the course of the season, I think at some point 5 or the rest of the family, at the very least 5, will come in proximity of him and her at some point in time. That's what I'm thinking, but we'll see. But obviously it's like this new apocalypse, and when he shows up and sees everything, it's like there's tanks. It's basically World War III, but in the 60s, and his family's there fighting, like going full-blown X-Men, like a missile comes towards Vanya. She kind of rips it apart. Freaking Klaus is like summoning other ghost soldiers, been up there doing this tentacle thing. Allison doing her rumor thing, and like, you know, Luther kind of shooting. I forgot who it was that he was shooting. I want to say it might have been Diego he might have been shooting, which, regardless. Oh, there's this thing at the beginning where like all these bullets are flying towards Diego and he's twirling. I was like, you're just able to dodge bullets like that. Okay. But then like later on, I'll go ahead and spoil it. Like, well, not spoil it, but jump to it. It's like he can bend. I mean, I guess it makes sense because he can throw objects. Like he kind of controls the direction they go in. But like, that was the first instance of, like, he didn't do anything like that necessarily in season 1, but I guess he's always doing it when he's throwing his knives. We just never see it, but like, he stopped all the bullets. I was like, you just went freaking Neo, and we're not going to say anything about that. I guess it's like, this is the other application of his abilities that, like, I mean, to be fair, we've always seen like what, like, you know, Klaus can really do when he pushes his abilities. Like, we haven't fully seen what the others, I think, are fully capable of. I mean, I feel like there might be levels to what everyone's capable of. Allison, I think we're seeing more and more about what Vanya's capable of. Obviously, 5 already got his upgrade because obviously his whole thing was about teleporting, but eventually it went into, you know, time travel. You know, very much, you know, comparison to make would be like Hero from Heroes. He was very much in the same way, master of space and time and everything, right? But nevertheless, he had to watch his family die. I mean, the difference was, at least with the 2019 apocalypse, his family was already dead. Doesn't make it any better, but they were already dead. In this instance, it's like, oh, they are about to die in front of your eyes, so it's a little different. But I love that whole angle of like him meeting up with that dude Elliot and that being the thing. I was so bummed when Elliot got killed. I was like, no, because he was kind of like their buddy during this whole thing. The moment he was with them and everything, I was like, oh, please don't tell me like something terrible was going to happen to Elliot. That just sucks because he was a conspiracy guy, and they were like, because he thought they were aliens and stuff like that. So it's just like that became like their HUD in the 60s. I love that being a whole thing. I just thought that was so neat. Elements I really enjoyed was like Luther apologizing to Vanya. I thought, because obviously he tracked down Vanya because he didn't know, like obviously he didn't know at the time about the marrying laws, but because it's like, oh, like he had heard about the apocalypse from 5, and it's like, if it's anyone, it's most likely Vanya. We brought her along with us. It was your decision to bring her with us. So he went there probably potentially with the thought of, hey, I might have to kill her if it means stopping the apocalypse from happening. But he sees that his sister doesn't have her memories. But for him, he apologized because he's like, I let you down. Like, the fact of the matter is, I hurt you. Like, it's like, I basically did something I thought was kind of the better good. But he's like, I didn't take the time to just talk to you. And he basically, like, I didn't do my brotherly duty. I thought that was such a sweet, touching moment because I was like, yeah, because truth be told is, you know, it's not just on Vanya, because later on, because 5 didn't tell Vanya all the ins and outs, because I think he just couldn't bring himself to do it, because it's like, I think it was more so because, we don't have time to deal with you processing the fact is that you're the reason the world ended, but I think it was also because he wanted to save his sister from it, being like, you know, I don't want to be the one that kind of lays that weight on you. But I think also because even Luther says it, he's like, it's complicated. Because, yeah, like, Vanya ending the world, that wasn't on her. Her family pushed her to do that. Like, everyone was kind of guilty. And, like, their entire upbringing and everything was the catalyst for that. It was just like, it just all finally came to a head. It was literally her entire life was building to that moment. And every action her family, her father made, and Harold's, like, they all lit that fuse, and they just made it like faster and faster and faster. It was always going to end up there. It's just like so everyone was kind of responsible in the grand scheme of things. But I just thought that was kind of a powerful moment of him kind of, apologizing about it. Other than that, we also had this line from Ben being like, oh, that Klaus was sober for like the past 3 years. He met up with Dave and everything, like, because he was trying to convince. And I thought that was sweet too, because it's like, once again, this is still, I think that's kind of his biggest regret, because let's not forget, he was never able to see Dave again, like, purposely, because like that whole day of, when he's actually sober and able to summon Dave, that never happened for him because 5 around the day and everything. But the last time he saw Dave was like seeing Dave's dead body again in the club when him and Ben were going after Luther. But other than that, like, he's never really had a chance to see him. So this is an opportunity to not only, see him again, but, this is a younger version of him, but save his life. Like, you died for nothing because you went to Vietnam, But obviously it's like, Dave doesn't want to listen to it because it's like, you sound crazy. And then, like, his uncle's there putting pressure on him, being like, oh, punch this, And it's just, it's sad and heartbreaking, It's just kind of like, because obviously for Klaus, it's like, this is the person he loves. And obviously, and for the little time we spent with Klaus over the course of these 2 seasons, that was like the first time we've ever known him to be like in love. Because Klaus doesn't ever seem like the very, like, monogamous type, but for him to be like, like, Dave was just that one that, got away. I mean, got away isn't necessarily the right, phrasing in this particular regard, but still. I did like that this season also kind of had, like, that mystery element, but there's also, like, a heavy conspiracy to it, because it's like, wait, the grassy knoll, our dad, like, here's a video, wait, our dad is here. It's like, wait, did he have something to do with JFK's assassination? It's like, Diego was kind of all about that, but Five is like, nah, maybe there's something more to this. And especially, like, it's because obviously it's a whole thing of, like, I think, you could say Diego's perpetuating, like, he already thinks the worst of his dad, so it's like, finding out his dad's also behind that, it's like, oh, of course he is, like, because he's a terrible person, and it's like, we got to find a way to stop, because later on Five is like, oh, we got to stop him, we got to find Dad. Diego's all about, we need to kill Dad, so it's a complicated thing, especially because, Diego and Luther have because, like, Vanya, it's like, oh, come on, he can't be that bad. It's like, okay, you're talking about the dude that's kept you isolated from the rest of us, who kept you drugged up, and who also made you forget, brainwashed you into believing you didn't have superpowers. And Vanya was like, holy crap, like, wow, he sucks, but, I still need to kind of meet him, So I just thought that was all, kind of interesting as well. I like the whole angle they did with the commission in the season, just like obviously the main thing being the Swedes, but I thought it was so fascinating in the long run, like the whole handler situation. That was a nice surprise where it's like, oh, she was actually still alive. I was like, man, she survived the damn grenade. She survived the gunshot to the head. How the hell? It's like, oh, because she has like a metal plate in her head. And so it's like she comes back, but like AJ, who's like a fish in a bowl, which is like, what? Okay, we're just gonna look past that. Not gonna bother explaining it. Why? Who cares? It is what it is. And like basically she got demoted and she got pissed because the moment she got sat at her desk by Herb, I was like, isn't that Five's desk? And immediately she pulls out Five's nameplate, throws it, and it clips Herb's ear and it stabs in the wall. I was like, oh, poor Herb. But nevertheless, like, I liked how that whole thing went down, especially like how that tied into Lila's story. I thought that, I was like, okay, there's gotta be something more to her. Like, what's up with this? Because it seemed like, I was like, oh, maybe this, because I was concerned the entire time. I was like, oh man, is she gonna like get close to Diego and he's gonna lose her or something like that? But then it turns out like she's the handler's daughter. I was like, holy shit. But then, like, because that was what confused me over the course of the season. I was like, wait, like, the moment, like, her parents were executed, because she had told that story, I was like, so was that BS? But it's like, oh, no, it was real. But then I was like, the moment we saw the suit and everything, I was like, it had to be Five who killed her. Like, that didn't come as a surprise to me when it was revealed it was Five. But what confused me because like, Handler's there, but I guess it's like, to be fair, she's a 4-year, like, Lila's a 4-year girl, so all it took was a Handler being like, oh, I came here to rescue you, I came to save you, because like Five had already left, so she's probably like making it seem like, oh yeah, I came here to save, because she's, further in the event, so she probably didn't see all the ins and outs of what went down, because obviously Handler, she was already there, but and so she's kind of from the very beginning, you can tell she was like manipulating Lila, because obviously she's also manipulating the situation, because it's like, oh, she wants Five alive again, and I'm like, why? You wanted him dead last season. I mean, obviously you tried to give him a chance, but then he, tried to blow you up with a grenade and everything, so everything kind of fell out the way it did. So that's why I'm like, why are you willing to give him a second chance? But then I was like, okay, so I was like, so are you going to try and use this as a means to kind of get good with the commission again, to kind of boost her? And it kind of turns out to be a little bit that, like, Five kind of plays his role, because she needs an assassin. She needs plausible deniability, so she needs Five to assassinate the board. And that was a bloody, nasty situation. I love that lady literally attacked him. It's not because all the people you murdered here, it's because you broke the vending machine. And it's like, okay. I even love that he's in a hallway and he's covered in blood, and those two people come out the room, and then both of those ladies just turn back around and go back in the room, and they close the door. That was like bloody and nasty, and I like how they depicted that too, just like him teleporting all over the place, and then you just see the aftermath, like one of the last dudes. It was like that samurai thing of like, when they unsheath their sword and then they quickly sheath it back. It was almost like that, because the guy was just sitting there like unaffected, and then you see a split come down his head, and then his head hits the table. That was like, I think that's probably like the bloodiest thing that's happened in the show so far. I was like, that was a gnarly scene, especially because it's even more messed up when you look at it, considering, yes, Five isn't actually a kid, but he's still a kid there standing with a shit ton of blood on him, Which, that whole manipulating Diego thing is sad, because you could tell that, Lila did like him, because it's like, oh, what about Diego? It's like, because her mom had brought it, Handler had brought up the whole Diego situation about, him and everything, because she was like wondering like, okay, you want Five alive, but what about Diego? And it's like, because she actually had started, to like him, because I think at the end of the day, like, she didn't realize it, but I think, and maybe he didn't realize it at the time, I think maybe they got there at the end of the season, but I think they found that they're kind of a little bit alike, in the grand scheme of things, like personality-wise and just kind of like who they are. Like, that's why I think she seemed crazy, but she was leaning into, the crazy and everything. But nevertheless, I like the whole thing about how every time it seemed like maybe they have an answer to this whole situation, just things would just kind of fall apart in many different regards. For one, Ben learning how to possess Klaus, that led to some issues in Klaus's department. Vanya's whole situation with Sissy getting close to her, there being a budding romance between them, because like obviously, Sissy was kind of like this life of hers. She once again, Carl was a good man and everything, but it was just a thing of like, just basically wanting more from it all, And the whole Harlan situation, Vanya having a little bit more control of her abilities this season, especially when she kind of went all Moses and rose the water up to save Harlan. And then the moment like we saw that energy coming from her into him, I was like, what the hell was that? I was like, because we saw that like with Reginald last season, like when the person, I think maybe his wife or or the person that's very important to him had died, the person who owned the violin that Vanya eventually ended up getting, like he had like, as those like rockets were leaving, like he had opened like a jar and that energy started flying out. So I was like, is Harlan about to become like a superpowered person or something? So I thought that was kind of fascinating. I was like, okay, what direction is that going to go? And it doesn't really pop up until, at first I was almost thinking like, because of that, I thought he was going to be able to talk or something, but it's like, no, that never ended up necessarily. It became a thing a little bit only later on because him and Vanya were connected. So like, only thing he ever said was Vanya's name, So there's that whole angle. Like I said, this whole, like, everyone's got their issues. I love that, like, Elliot and Luther were getting high on, oh, God, they were basically high on gas or whatever. I forgot what it was. But they're both laughing at their, like, miserable situations and stuff like that. Their messed up love lives. Allison, Klaus, and Vanya getting drunk. Because, like, the whole conversation about them being, like, Luther and Allison, being brother and sister, and she's like, we're not even biologically related, but it's still just kind of like, yeah, but the fact and Klaus was basically like, the moment you start saying the buts is when things kind of start getting complicated, and then it's like, oh, you're in love with Sissy and everything. He's like, well, it's better than your last boyfriend, the whole him being a serial killer thing, and Allison was kind of being like, Klaus, shut up. And then Vanya's like, wait, what? And she's like, later, we'll talk about it later. And then I love Klaus being like, yeah. And then he's like, my complicated situation. And he's basically like, honestly, the only person in his family that actually had a decent, committed relationship, long-lasting relationship, was Five and the mannequin he was banging. And you have that look on Vanya's face like, wait, what? It's like, oh yeah. You don't know about Dolores, right. So, and then them kind of drinking, and I wonder, is that just gonna be a staple in the show, the little dance sequences? Granted, it was only 3 of them, but it was nice to kind of see that, especially like after like how divided the family was last season, and a little divided this season in more ways than one, but like you saw them kind of come together, to many different occasions. So I thought that was kind of neat. Also was interesting to see how skilled their dad is, especially like when Five and Diego first ran into him. Diego had his ass. Diego held his own. It's only because he paused because he's like, wait, Dad. And then Reginald proceeded to stab him, calling him an amateur. Then there's the whole Pogo situation. Because also I really liked when Diego met Grace too. And it's like, Grace? And I was like, what's up? I was like, oh, she must be the person that... Because now with having rewatched season 1, I'd assumed that Grace was built around the person that Reginald had to leave behind. I thought that was who Grace was originally built on. Maybe that was her in her younger days. But we find out no, Grace was a real person, and it's like, oh crap, she had like she has a Southern accent, she has a Texan accent, and obviously it's very weird for Diego because it's especially because they lost, he lost her once, got her back, and they ended up losing her again. But now here she is, a real person, and it's just kind of like, holy crap! Like, I can't believe someone would actually want to spend time with Reginald. Like, it's kind of, their dad being the asshole he is. I'm assuming that the serum that he had given Pogo when Pogo was down, I'm assuming that's the same thing he gave Luther to save Luther's life as well. I just assume. I could be mistaken because I felt like the serum inside, because when it was Pogo it was red, but maybe it's the same thing in one and I'm just not remembering, but whatever the case may be. They tried on multiple occasions to meet up with their dad, and they couldn't, because whether it be the Swedes getting in their way, Lila protecting Five over protecting Diego, obviously having ulterior motives, and I like Five being like, oh, you might have my dim-witted brother convinced, but he's like, I don't trust you, and it's like, well, to be fair, Five has trust issues, kind of the entire family does, but in this particular case, his trust issues are warranted. It was mad messed up when they actually meet their dad, and once again, it's just like, I felt so bad for Diego because like Diego's like saying like, oh, this and that, and he's like, oh, bravo, you figured me out, and then he proceeded to tear Diego down, and you see Diego shrinking. Literally the entire family, in particular, you see Allison kind of look over to it and then kind of put her head down, like none of them said anything, because it's like, because even Five had warned that, he was like, oh, like, because he talked about the fact of the matter is. And I thought about that too, and I thought it was so fascinating, like, because Five says it, he's like, I haven't seen the old man in like 45 years. Like, the fact of the matter is, he's like, I'd always hear his voice, I think about him a lot, I'd always hear his voice. I was like, what would he be saying in your head? He's like, told you so. And he's like, somehow, some way, I know that when I get to him, he's just going to say, told you so. And Diego's like, why would he be that? He's like, I don't know. Because the whole thing is about their dad getting inside of their heads. Like, Diego was like, we're not going to do that. We're Team Zero, that whole situation. And then it proceeded to blow up in their face. And in particular, Diego's, because like his dad ripped him apart. And to the point, Diego started stuttering again, just because, And so it's interesting. It's not just like Vanya that was felt small in the family. Like, everyone made her feel small. But to be fair, she felt small because their dad made her feel small. But also, he made the kids feel small. So, they probably needed an outlet. They sadly needed a punching bag, and Vanya kind of fit that. So it's like they needed someone weaker than them to kind of be punched down on, to a certain extent. I think that's what that kind of came down to. So I kind of felt bad. Each one of them showcasing their abilities and stuff like that. I even love Ben possessing Klaus like partway through. He's like, I'm Ben. I even love later on when Klaus is like fighting it so hard, and then he literally throws Ben up. I was almost wondering, like, when he threw Ben up, I was like, would people be able to see Ben? But it's like, no, he did just see, like, the, like, absurd amount of vomit that came out of his body, It's just, I thought that was kind of, interesting. I also love Klaus trying to cut off his cult by being like, I'm a fraud, but they were like, oh, I'm a fraud too, and he's like, dude, I tried to break this off, I tried to end this, and they still just love me too much. They believe my words. Once again, what was that movie? Was it The Other Guys? It reminds me of The Other Guys when he's basically quoting stuff because he's like, don't go chasing waterfalls. It immediately made me think of Michael Keaton and in The Other Guys being like, the entire movie he's quoting TLC, and you're like, are you quoting TLC? He's like, no, what are you talking about? My mind immediately went there when he said, don't go chasing waterfall. Another thing about this season was I felt so bad about the very complicated Luther and Allison thing, as I was talking about earlier. Well, for Luther to find out that, she's married, it's like, oh yeah, because basically Allison also had to, she never went too deep about the fact is because it's like, oh yeah, I met your brother Klaus, and then Luther showed up, and obviously Ray was kind of pissed about that because it's like, okay, you're lying about stuff, and obviously the sit-in and everything, and like a cop was beating on Ray, so she used her power, and so he was almost like, he was starting to believe like, you're with the feds or whatever, because no black woman, no black person in general should be able to say anything to a cop to stop them unless you were kind of on the inside show, sitting here to kind of destroy our organization. But then she kind of explains everything to him, like probably the like ins and outs of everything. I even love later on he's kind of losing his mind about it because like, one of the Swedes is dead in their house, and Klaus had showed up and he's like, all right, so what are we doing? Are we burning or burying? And then it's also the thing of like, wait, is this your first time getting rid of a dead body? And Allison never really answered. It's like, ooh, yeah. I thought that was kind of fascinating because I love that like Ray was hyperventilating because it's like, when Herb showed up later on and it's the whole thing about like everything that's going down, he's just like, that guy just beamed here like it's nothing. Now I meet another one of your brothers, there's a dead body in here, and he was freaking out. To be fair, this is one of those moments like, this is like a Squidward and SpongeBob when he's in the future saying future and he's in the fetal position. It's literally one of those moments I thought was just kind of fascinating. I just love that moment, him just like freaking the hell out like that. But circling back to what I was bringing up, it's sad because, especially on the front of like, because, Luther was even saying like, I don't have the room to judge you, or no one nor any of our siblings have the right to judge you because you felt alone. The fact of the matter is you found someone that kind of be there for you when none of us could be. He's like, I'm happy for you. And obviously, like, she loves Ray and everything. And because obviously staying here in the 60s is where he belongs because he needs to, keep up the fight because she was explaining everything, Obama and obviously the complicated thing, she even says like, yeah, this is the fight here, but even in 2019 not everything's resolved, but it's like, yeah, but the fight here is very important because things might not be perfect in 2019, but at the very least the fight here led to things being better. Things aren't completely solved, things aren't 100% better, but the fact is they were way better than they were before, which, that's, I'm sure that's a commentary anyone could add on to, like, considering present day being like whether the, so I still believe that, but, maybe that's just me being very naive and optimistic. Some people might look at it more pessimistically, like, it's, I think it comes down, each person's, personal view on everything. I love the whole bit where Luther is helping young Five meet old Five. At the time, because that's all I kept wondering about that whole situation too, because every time Diego kept bringing up the whole like assassination, I was like, Five was here during that time. Like, the fact of the matter is it wasn't him who pulled the trigger, but I was like, it had to be someone from the commission, right? Just because because before when Five, I guess Five was there just to make sure things kind of went off without a hitch. I guess that was his main purpose. Like, I don't think it was necessarily to pull the trigger, whatever the case may be. And that leads to a whole like weird thing because that creates a paradox. And I like that basically there are 7 stages to like a paradox: the itching, the paranoia, and then like the homicidal rage being the final step to it all. And then like each one of them, like, young Five not trusting older Five saying we should kill younger Five, and it's like, wait, what? Because younger Five can give him the equation necessary so that when he travels back in time, rather than him turning into a kid like young Five did, he'll stay the 58-year-old man that, he is, So it's this whole thing. And I even love like young Five calling Luther out, because it's like, you're a terrible liar. It's written on your face, because the fact of the matter is you care about, seniority. The fact of the matter is I'm technically 14 days older than that dude. So you should be listening to me and not him. And also it was actually a pretty dope moment of like both Fives teleporting all over the way, fighting each other. It kind of reminds me, once again, I circle everything back to speedsters on the Flash. It reminds me of a speedster battle, and I think it's so dope because the entire time Luther's in slow motion recovering from the nut shot, and just them kind of duking it out, like teleporting all over the place. I thought was kind of pretty dope. There's also that complicated thing with Vanya and Sissy, I thought was interesting, where it's like the moment they got caught, because I felt so bad because Vanya's like kind of basically run away with me, but she won't. And I think I'm reading too much into it, because part of me wonders, is that supposed to be kind of like a parallel to Agnes and Hazel, because she asked him to run away and they did. I mean, I guess you could also make the argument it's almost kind of like that with Luther and Allison. They almost had their runaway moment going to go see Claire, but sad, once again, that was kind of undone. But the fact of the matter is, Agnes said yes to Hazel. I want to call her Missy. Sissy didn't want to with Vanya, just because it's like there's so much. It's like, Carl's her husband, and the fact of the matter is also like, this isn't, because we saw the way Klaus was treated, for, his sexuality. So it's like, Vanya and her wouldn't be, because she also has to look out for Harlan, her son as well. And then the whole thing about like, Carl catching them, and you're just like, where is he going to go with this? Like, threatening to like send Harlan to like a facility if Vanya doesn't leave. And then, Vanya tries to leave with Miss Sissy. See, I did it again. I need to stop. The moment they're like, the cops are blocking, I was like, oh, that sucks. And she's like, because I left a note. I was like, no. I was like, Sissy, why'd you leave a note? I was like, no. That could have worked out so perfectly, especially because Vanya's literally running against the clock, because like obviously like they were supposed to get back to 5 so they could potentially get back home and everything. I'm curious in the long run, like, because obviously Handler had her ulterior motives. I'm curious whether the suitcase probably would have taken them back there. Maybe, I don't know. Because they could have easily popped back afterwards. So I guess there was going to be some truth to it. Like, I'm wondering what would have necessarily... Because, for Handler, all of it's about having power. So if it's like, if I have to kind of knock back 2 apocalypses to kind of keep them out of my hair and put myself in a favorable position, it's a win-win for me. I get them out of my hair forever, and I get to, kind of have control over, like, protecting the, being, as she says, like, being, like, the most powerful woman in time, So, I'm wondering whether everything was really going to be copacetic with that whole, suitcase. We'll never, 100%, know in that regard, but still. Then, like, Vanya getting caught by the FBI, and then her being kind of, interrogated, and obviously it's like, she really doesn't remember everything, but now she's being looked at as, like, a Russian spy, and it's like, how'd you do what you did? And she starts generating her power, she gets drugged, then they start interrogating and torturing her. And I like that whole interesting, like, metaphor what her mind created, where it's like her and her siblings sitting at the table, and basically they're eating brains, and each bite she's remembering everything, because she didn't want to, but once again her dad kind of convinced her, like, you have to remember, you need to kind of take back yourself, and obviously because Diego, because he was taken by Lila, because she wanted to bring him in to kind of serve the commission, just because obviously she cared about him, but she was like obviously using it as an excuse. I even love that little orientation type of class. I thought was kind of interesting, where like they had a little like suitcase mascot. I love that. Like, I was like, oh, it's so interesting to see the commission has like branding like that. I thought was kind of interesting and dope. But nevertheless, when it was all said and done, though, But like Diego, with Herb's help, ended up finding out like Vanya sadly is the cause of the next apocalypse. She doesn't end up being the reason why Kennedy died. Kennedy survived, but she ends up blowing up parts of the FBI building, and they think it's Russia, and it kind of turns into a pointing finger situation, which eventually leads to nuclear war, then nuclear fallout, and so Vanya's kind of at the center of it because yet again she's a bomb. Sadly, it's like she was a bomb. She always will be a bomb. So they have to stop her. I don't think Diego went there with the intention of killing her, because that's what I was worried. I was like, are you? Because I was like, you going there with that intention kind of screwed the pooch last time too. But I think it was just a thing of we have to stop her. So Klaus and Allison go, and each one of them tries to push past it. Like all the it's so interesting. Like so much energy is radiating. Like the bodies are literally stuck to the wall and to the ceilings. Because Vanya's remembering everything, and it's overpowering her and everything. And in the grand scheme of things, each one of them is trying to get closer and closer, but none of them can, except for Ben. I was like, dude, and to me, I'm not gonna lie to you, that moment between Ben and Vanya was so beautiful that I started tearing up, dude. I was like, oh my god, this is heartbreaking, because for her, it's like she's like, I remember everything, and the fact is she's like, I'm a monster, like why can't I control myself like the rest of you? And I like what Ben was saying. He was like, this is actually kind of on Dad, like, because the fact of the matter is, even before all this, like Dad treated you like a bomb before you were even a bomb. Like the fact of the matter, he couldn't control your rage, but the fact of the matter is you can. The fact of the matter is, because he's like, I don't look at you as like that, because he's like, you're my sister, and saying that she could basically do this, and he starts fading away. She's like, I'm hurting you, and for him, he's like, I died 17 years ago, and all this time I've spent with Klaus has just been basically icing on the cake. And it was just like, and he was like, can you hug me while I go? And I was like, oh, the feels, dude. I was like, no, Ben! Especially because you just learned how to possess Klaus and everything. Because despite everything, despite him and Klaus having their ups and downs, like Ben screwing him over during that card game early in the season, kind of leaving him high and dry in multiple situations, wanting to possess his body without his permission, and then possessing it for longer than he agreed upon. It's like despite all the ups and downs, it's like he was always Klaus's best friend, because the reason why he's here, and we ended up seeing that like in the past, like after the funeral, Klaus channeled everything to bring Ben back.'s like, oh, you could always, go to the light later on, bro. Yeah, let's go piss in Dad's gas tank or whatever. And that was even harsh too. Their dad blaming them. It's like, oh, 6 dying is on all of you. Like you failed and everything. And it kind of turned into a pointing thing, because Vanya's like, it was nobody's fault, but Diego's like, how would you know? You weren't even there. And then like, I think it was like Allison and Luther were sticking up for her, like, whoa, don't get at her like that. It's like, Dad's right, we weren't strong enough, we messed up, this is it. Because once again, we still never knew what the ins and outs of like why Ben died. Because it was, I think, I'm vaguely remembering them saying like in that particular, because this was like in episode 10, I think, of the I think it was like the final episode of the season, but I can't remember what the necessary ins and outs were. I think it was basically the mission went wrong, because I guess in my mind I was wondering if it had something to do with his powers, whether he kind of exploded from it or something like that, but it like turns out that's not the case. It just like something went wrong on the mission that led to him die. Like they never really went fully in details, but they did reference it a little bit. I'm just blanking on what they said exactly, but despite saving Vanya, instead, not, the building not exploding, so it's like, okay, they prevented the apocalypse, now they just have to try and save Kennedy, but Diego couldn't save Kennedy, because by the time he gets to what he believes to be his dad, it's another stand-in, and then there's a letter saying, told you so. And then we end up finding out, though, Reginald wanted nothing to do with that, though. It's like, he was like, I agreed to all this stuff if you promised that you would leave them alone. You would leave Kennedy alone, but basically the 12, that powerful group he was a part of, was kind of like, well, Kennedy had to go, and the fact of the matter is Reginald was like, I'm done with you, because basically they were giving him space parts and stuff, like, or rather his project on the moon and stuff like that, and they were threatening like, oh, if you kind of go against us, we'll let people know who you really are. And then we see Reginald kind of reaching for his, I'm like, is he about to pull off his skin or something? He pulls off his mask, and it's like, because I completely forgot about that angle last episode where it showed like those rockets and everything. So I was like, where the hell is he from? So it's like, oh, he's straight up an alien. So it's like, that's interesting. And obviously he has to have something to do with all the, superpowered babies that were born in this world. But that's the question, like, why? Like, are these powers meant to be some shape or form? Like, they're not just powers. It's almost like the kids from your world living on. Is that what that's supposed to, I'm probably reading too much into it, but I'm like, what is that necessarily all about? That's still kind of an unknown factor in all of this. But he ends up killing all of them. So immediately my brain starts thinking, like, all that stuff on the moon, the space stuff, because, like, he's supposed to have been helping them with, like, space travel, in particular, getting to the moon before Russia and everything. So part of me wonders, because I'm about to say, it can't be about getting back to his world, because it's like, I think his world is gone. It's either dead or was in the process of dying when they ended up leaving, so there was no getting back to it. But it's like, well, what was he doing on the moon? Like, because Luthor thought, well, everything he was doing up there was busy work, it's just stuff to keep him busy. But even then, it's like, maybe there was more to it. Probably not, but maybe it's just like what Luthor was up to kind of was nothing, but then there was another thing, another aspect to it all too. Or maybe by the time Luthor was sent up there, it already served its purpose long before Luthor got there, so it was no longer necessary. So what important aspect it played probably might have no longer been, a factor anymore, regardless. So, but obviously, like, that was interesting, though. He didn't have anything necessarily to do with that. But at the same time, you're like, so why be so secretive about it? But I guess it's like, because he's someone who has spent so much time being secretive, because Diego sent Grace down that path to look into it, and for Grace, she felt like she couldn't, wait, because obviously she couldn't just wait to be able to be in a position to trust Reginald, because she wanted to be with him, kind of, but it's like, how can I be with someone who holds so many secrets? That she's like, I need to know before being with you that you are a good man, and she honestly couldn't wait to find out that answer, so that was kind of a sad, complicated situation, and I think we eventually see kind of like the domino effects of what that means, but we'll get to there soon enough. I loved that whole situation where, like, obviously, like, I thought that was another powerful moment too, where Vanya is trying to help out with the whole situation with Harlan, and she wants to go, but everyone else is like, dude, we're literally on the most wanted list. Like, everyone wants us dead. They think we're responsible for Kennedy. Like, literally all of us are up there. I even love, and they're like, and this little boy might be held hostage. And Five's like, oh, I like that. They got that right. The fact of the matter is, I do constantly feel like I'm being held hostage by this family. But the fact of the matter is, none of them wanted to go with Vanya. I thought that was so heartbreaking. Because in that moment, she's like, I know, but she's like, I'm used to, don't, she kind of wanted to learn from her mistake. It's like, I tried to do stuff on my own. She's like, this time, I want to ask for your help, but they wouldn't come along. I was like, that sucks. But then Klaus gets in, and, Vanya ends up telling him Ben's final words. And I thought that was beautiful, being like, you weren't the reason that kept me here. Like, the fact of the matter is, he was like, I was scared to cross over, because I think it's just like when, you step into the light, because I think for Ben, he didn't know what was waiting for him, but like back home, it's like, oh, he knew what was waiting for him. He knew what his family's there. He didn't want to let them go. So, and Klaus talks about the fact is, well, that shitheel. He's like, I literally spent all these years feeling guilty about the fact is I was the one that kind of kept him from basically going to the afterlife and whatnot. But I just thought that was a sweet moment. And then, like, literally everyone else starts piling in. Literally the last one in is Luthor, and he's in the back, and the cart sinks in, and he's like, if I hear any fat jokes from anybody, I'm getting out. So I thought that was so beautiful, that it's just like they're in this together. It's just like, it's like finally kind of coming together as a family fully together, and Vanya's there with the whole Harlan situation, trying to save him. Then Handler and Lila show up, and then literally every agent they have scattered across time comes there in that moment, and it turned, bullets are flying everything. And like I said, Diego does the thing of stopping bullets. It's like, oh, this is bad, until Vanya comes out, does a thing, shockwave, literally massacres everyone except for Lila. And I'm like, what's up with that? And then she starts summoning up power. My brain starts going off in multiple directions. I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, she's just like Vanya. I was like, is she actually like Vanya's twin or something? Like, what's up with that? Because earlier in the season, part of me wondered if she had abilities, because she was moving too damn fast. Because at one point, because earlier when her and Five had their toe-to-toe, he looked up and he saw her, and then she walks away, and then he sees her walking across like the alleyway. I'm like, how the hell did she move that? I was like, and even during the fight, I was like, is she teleporting? There ain't no way she's moving that damn fast. Like, what's up with that? But it's interesting. But then it's like, I was like, wait, she starts using everyone else's abilities. I was like, wait, did their abilities come from her? And some shit. I was like, what is it? But then it's like, no, she has a mirror ability. She's kind of like Peter from the final season of Heroes, because when Peter's initial ability is he has an osmosis absorption ability. He touches you, he gets all your abilities. He could do multiple at once, but then later on he can only get one at a time. That ended up being her downfall. Like, she can only do one at a time, but she was kicking everyone's ass. She kicked Luther's ass. Like, he went superhuman strength on her. She went toe to toe with him. Used Allison's rumor ability against her, used Vanya's ability against her. I love that Klaus was falling, and luckily some random ghost, ended up grabbing him. But it's all because Lila believed that Five was the one responsible for killing her parents. And even he was like, the fact of the matter is, he's like, yes, I've killed a lot of people. It's not trying to, because that was always a thing for Five. He said it last season, like, he didn't enjoy the killing, but Handler was kind of like, oh, stop pretending. Like, you really, you enjoyed it. Like, when he had massacred all of the board, like, she tried to make it seem like he was really into it and everything when he wasn't. But I thought that was such an interesting situation, because that question has come up before. It's like, well, we know about where 7 of the 43 are. Where are the others? Well, we know one of those was Harold. One of those kids born on that same day was Harold. He ended up having no abilities. But it turns out Lila was one of those kids, and that's what this was all about. Fact of the matter is, Handler specifically set up that order, and even framing AJ for it, so that she could get Five to kill her parents, so that she could get her, because it's like she wanted one of those, like, if she could get someone. I wonder, did she specifically know what Lila was capable of, or is it just, you're a superpowered kid, I'm gonna make you my own? Like, I'm wondering. I mean, to be fair, you have a view of the entire timeline, so she probably was aware what Lila's future held for her and everything. So. And even Diego was kind of feeling weird about it, because I think for him, the moment he found out, like, you don't think she's, like, related to us by blood or anything. It's like, no, you're all super not related. But because obviously it would be more akin to Luther and Allison, but even more not akin to that, because you guys grew up together, you and Lila didn't. But because he started feeling weird about the fact that him and Lila had sex and everything. But nevertheless, it was an interesting, reveal and everything, and especially when it all got pieced together. Like, the fact of the matter is, Diego trying to tell her, like, no, you're one of us. The fact of the matter is, basically, I think he talked, because she was like, he's like, I know you, because he's like, I know what it's like to kind of, I forgot what his exact wordings were, but it was like a very beautiful thing. I forgot, like, because for one, Luther tried to say something to her, something heartfelt, and then she was just kind of like, bleh, kind of gagging about it, and Luther was like, well, I tried. But I forgot what it was that Diego said, like, because he knows that, like, what it's like to kind of love someone, and the situation is that despite, like, the crazy situation that he's in when it comes to his family, despite everything, he knows that they love him back, and I thought that was so, like, very beautiful, moving, and touching. But then, like, Chandler comes in and they all die. I was like, oh shit. I was like, okay, so I was like, either, but Lila was still alive. So I was like, I thought Lila was going to be the one to rewind time. I was like, is she going to rewind time and sacrifice herself? But her mom ends up killing her before she could kill, her. And, but then, like, Five is still alive, but then the Swede comes and kills her. And then, because he ended up figuring out the lie, because he smelled that. I love that, like, that, how that whole thing was revealed, of, like, how she sent the fake message to the Swedes and everything, and he ended up smelling it. He smelled lavender, and remember, she smelled like lavender. But before he could kill Five remembered what his dad said. Rather than trying decades, why don't you, your appetite's always been a little too big. Why don't you try seconds? And in that moment, he rewinds seconds. And I just love how that's displayed. It's almost like he's running past all the bodies, like the way that was done, and everyone's like slowly, like, times rewinding for all of them. I was like, that was so awesome, like how that was executed and how that looked. And so he ends up taking down Handler. The Swede kills her, and then Five is kind of like, enough. Like, let's let this end here. And then he was like, enough, because he knows that Handler was behind all of this anyway. She set this all in motion. So he kind of walks away, which later on we see that he gets on the bus from Klaus's cult, even though Klaus doesn't like calling it a cult, even though it is super occult. So it's like, oh, he's part of that now. I was like, I'm interested to see, I'm wondering what that would turn into, what his life is going to be like now with all of that. But, luckily Vanya was able to take what she had in Harlan away, but obviously it means like she can never be with Sissy, because it's like, oh, going to the future with you would be fine and dandy, but it's like, we would never have a normal life. Like, would people ever come after you again because of you not being normal? It's like, I'm not scared of you, I'm scared for you, because your life will never be, normal. And that was the thing of like, they could never have a normal life because of who they are. So she kind of has to say goodbye to Sissy. And I thought that was interesting, because Sissy was like, basically like, when you get a safe opportunity to come see her, and I was like, well, they go back to present day, Sissy might not be around anymore, but Harlan might be an old dude by then. This being the 60s, he might be in like, what, his 50s or 60s himself. So that could be a possibility. I don't know if Sissy would necessarily still be alive around that time, but I guess she meant like, if you can safely time travel or meet me again at some point. I interpret it as more like meet me present day, but Allison having to say goodbye to Ray. And I thought it was beautiful, because it was a thing of like, it's not just me. Literally that entire family grew and changed because of all this. Because Vanya was there leaning on Diego, and Diego leaned back on her. I was like, because she was always the black sheep of the family, but they, it's like, no, we're kind of in this together. We are a family. Like, because even when she had her memories going, Vanya kind of says, I'm not sure if this will mean much, but I am sorry. And he was like, yeah, it actually does. You apologizing and everything. I thought that was, kind of sweet, because they didn't hate their sister. They knew it was complicated circumstances that got her to where she was. So they're getting ready, they get ready to time travel and everything. And they wind back up in 2019, because it's like, oh, the apocalypse didn't happen, we're saved, yeah, it's all good. But then it's like, wait, why is there a picture of Ben and not 5? Wait, Dad's still alive. Oh, I guess you would be. Wait, what? Not the Umbrella Academy, the Sparrow Academy, which in my mind immediately makes me think of Red Sparrow, which I'm thinking like, so does that mean that this whole thing is owned, like, is it kind of like a Russian project? Like, to be fair, once again, multiple instances of they have fucked with time, like the original timeline, because that ending asks so many questions, because it's like, at what point did they change everything? Because remember, the 5 they sent back to 2019, like when young 5 and old 5 were fighting and Luther kicked them, like that old 5 knew a lot more. But to be fair, their timeline stayed relatively the same. So I guess like to kind of keep the continuity, to keep everything in, to keep everything from like unraveling, 5 probably kept his mouth shut about a lot of that, about what went wrong. Because even older 5 was under the impression, like, all we have to do is make good with Vanya, and then we kind of undo everything. Because there was a whole thing about, like, all right, the whole thing was supposed to be, like, all right, the calculations, if you get them right. But at that moment, like, he wasn't focused on trying to get the calculation, because he was trying to get the suitcase and everything. But, so he still ended up winding up as a kid, so it became irrelevant. But that still begs the question, when that 5 got turned into a kid again, what was the story like in season 1? Like, obviously he knew a little bit more. He knew where Vanya's story was going to take them, but enough to the point where like their timeline stayed the same. Not like, once again, the time travel rules and everything, because it's like, okay, so did the moment that happened, did they technically enter a branch timeline? Because when he went back in time, it created a branch timeline that was what happened in season 1, but it was a little bit different. Once again, are we doing traditional time travel rules, which I think we are, because I don't think we're doing in-game rules. But even if we're not doing in-game rules, like, you could be doing a thing of, like, you're splintering off the timelines, even though you're not necessarily seeing it. But there's that. There's also the fact is Harlan still had abilities at the end, not to the full scale, but we see him levitating that thing at the very end. So there's still the possibility of him being out there with abilities. Lila ended up running away. I'm sure she had no wanting to go back to the commission, because Herb is leading that now. He's leading the charge. Obviously I'm sure he's going to do a very different job at like running things, because obviously it's got like it was going to be like a new like board had to be made and stuff like that, but for now Herb was kind of running things until they get a new board. So I'm curious like what that means for the future of the commission. But this all kind of ties into like, because the fact of the matter is, it was Ben that they saw, the one that was there. It's like, who are these guys? Like, so that means Ben is the only one of the 7 who got adopted. The other 6 didn't. So he has 6 other siblings potentially because they went back in time and they met with their, well, because he seemed like he did recognize him, but also didn't. So I guess it's like a lot changed because he had future knowledge, because they thought, I guess in their mind, they were thinking they were going to go back to their 2019 where things weren't apocalyptic, maybe. But I guess they didn't realize like how drastic of a change they made. Because I mean, who knows what Allison told Ray? That probably won't be something he'll tell anyone else because all that stuff is like, he knows what he's fighting for. He knows what the fight is real and it's true, and that's what this is all about. So he probably won't change too much in that regard. But everything they went down with the FBI, them being associated with what's his face's death, Kennedy's death, like I'm sure all that still happened and that was true. So like that stuff wasn't erased. They went into the future of that timeline that they created. So it's like, it's not like they erased all the mistakes they made. This world was built on the mistakes they made in the 60s, so it's like the full ramifications of that we don't know, so it's like, okay, so you're in a timeline where you guys technically don't exist, but there's this Sparrow Academy, and that makes you wonder, they're the Umbrella Academy, they're supposed to be the heroes, is the Sparrow Academy supposed to be the villains? And like I said, like, is this kind of supposed to be like a Russian thing? Because we don't know where Reginald ended up after he split with the 12, after he killed them. But another key factor to keep in mind is Grace isn't in his life. So because of Diego's actions, it put Grace in a position where she couldn't be with Reginald anymore. And so, yes, he's a hard ass, he's this and that. Grace probably kept him in because they made so many changes. They did this and that. Like, it changed a lot. Like, Reginald didn't have Grace by his side to kind of keep him grounded. So there might not even be a Grace robot running around because it's probably like, oh, this is the woman that I lost, that maybe she, or maybe because I don't know. Because it's also the thing of he was like, oh, Pogo ran off. Like, we saw him with Pogo at one point in time, but he was like, oh, because of you, my monkey got away. But it's like, is Pogo still alive in this timeline, or did, like, Reginald never be able to find him again? Like, after, like, Pogo got away from him? Like, there's so many questions in that regard. Like I said, what does this mean for Harlan? Present day, he'd be so much older, but he'd still be an old man, potentially with Vanya's abilities, if not other abilities. So the exact question, I'm assuming going forward, you would ask, more questions would come up about Reginald, what he really is, and what his part to play in all of these things with the kids. And once again, we've met one of the other kids. There's still a shit ton of them out there about, like, well, what are their situations like? Have they discovered their abilities? Well, we're meeting more of them, obviously, potentially, considering there are 6 other members of the Sparrow Academy, instead of the Umbrella Academy. So it's like, well, how do you even begin undoing all this? And like I said, like, you still have to go back to, well, how did Hazel get to where he did? So I think at some point, like I said, I think 5 had to go back in time and set Hazel on his path, would set them on their path. And I still think that 5 is the reason why their dad knows him. Because like I said, I think them meeting him in the 60s is what made him know about the apocalypse. But then again, things are different now. So I guess by doing all that they did, stopping Handler and everything, they stopped the apocalypses, whether it be the 60s or the one in 2019. So I'm confusing a lot of that. I know, but it's just like time travel. It makes, it starts racking your brain about, like, the many possibilities and directions things could go. But it's just like, of course, everything wasn't going to end very copacetic, which also begs the question, like, if they're not there as the Umbrella Academy, that also means Claire doesn't exist in this timeline, potentially. Like, a lot of their lives as they knew it don't exist. So it's like, I mean, because truth be told, she's the only one that really had any ties to the present day like that. Even though this is their time, and it's like the 60s aren't where they belong, this is where they belong. Also, this is a different Ben, so the Ben we've come to know won't, he doesn't exist anymore. I don't know, probably there's not going to be any bringing him back. Maybe we're just going to be stuck with this particular Ben. Maybe they'll be able to convince him to be good or something. Or once again, that's if the Sparrow Academy ends up being bad. So many questions. From what I can tell, it doesn't seem like it's been announced whether or not Netflix has renewed the Umbrella Academy for a third season. I came across one thing saying reportedly, so nothing is set in stone because other stuff is saying it hasn't been renewed yet. Either way, once again, we're still early days. The season literally came out today at the time of me recording this, so it's only been out for like a couple hours at this, almost a full day at this point in time. But the fact of the matter is, like, it's going to be some time, but I really hope it does get a third season, because I'd love to see, like, where the hell we're going from here. Like, what did this next adventure look like? Will it, like I said, will it include Hazel? Will it include Agnes? Now that the commission's been taken out of play, and Lila's kind of out there on her own, eventually she'd come back potentially to this family and being like, oh, be their number 8, but they're supposed to got rid of the numbers. They're Team 0 now and everything, right? So what that looks like for them, what's Klaus's situation going to look like now without Ben? Because Ben was always kind of like, in his eyes, it's kind of like, oh, you never want me to do what I want to do. You always want to do the opposite of what I want to do. And the fact of the matter is, he always felt like, Ben was kind of a nag. It's like, you're like, you've become dad. 17 years after dying and you've done it, you've become dad. Obviously that pissed Ben off, but it's like, but I think Ben acted as his conscience. Without Ben around, maybe, Klaus might clean up a little bit. I mean, to be fair, he didn't have to worry about the whole situation with drugs and everything necessarily. All he had to do, he had alcohol and everything like that. There's also, I'm completely forgot. Let's not forget, there's also the angle of Dave. Dave joined the military way sooner than he was supposed to. Like, he was supposed to enlist, like, some point later on down the road because of, Vietnam and everything, but he ended up signing up way sooner. So, obviously, Klaus kind of, because of his influence and running into him at that point in time in front of his uncle, kind of pressuring him into enlisting, it set, Dave down a different path. Now, what that path necessarily looked like, how different it would be, like, would he eventually meet Klaus? Maybe him and Klaus never meet. And so it becomes, they are, like, they themselves being paradoxes, because obviously they don't exist in this timeline. So, which is so interesting, because there's like multiple timelines. It's almost like at the end of the day, they're always supposed to die, because they died in the first apocalypse, they died in the second apocalypse. So it's almost like the world's trying to say, you're not supposed to be here, Yet they're fighting tooth and nail to survive and save the world in the grand scheme of things. So what this next adventure of saving the world, what that's going to look like, with their dad being alive and everything, and what that means. Maybe they'll finally be able to get some answers, because all the damn secrets he's kept from them. Once again, is this version of Reginald the one from the sixth? Like, is it just like, what 2019 did they pop into? Like I said, I think this is a continuation of the timeline where they were in the 60s, and this is a Reginald who became a different Reginald because of everything he went through. Maybe, like I said, maybe we'll finally get insight into whoever or whatever he is and his species, and why he's here on Earth, and what his connection is to, what the 43 kids that were born on that day and everything, around the world, and what that means. Like I said, I'd love to see what a season 3 would entail. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.